The Baker Mayfield saga continues in Tampa Bay, but for how long? Baker Mayfield, 7 interceptions in training camp so far. Many are wondering, with this potentially being Baker's last chance, if he doesn't win the starting job over Kyle Trask, is he done?
Done as in being a starting quarterback in the NFL?
Done as in being a starting quarterback in the NFL for sure. But do you think that this is just his last year? Like, even if he's the backup, like, okay, he sits on Tampa's bench for a year. Is that it? Like, can Baker Mayfield walk into the sunset after that?
So I can't remember if it was you and I talking about it or someone else, but last year when the whole Rams thing was going on with Baker Mayfield, and he was having this career revival and an incredible 13-point comeback on Thursday Night Football for the Rams, I remember saying at the time, Baker Mayfield is one of those quarterbacks where he's going to have to reinvent himself to have a second stage of his career, because it's pretty clear Baker Mayfield's no longer a starting quarterback in the NFL. Basically, the way that came about is really sad, where his former team, Cleveland, basically didn't sign him to an extension going into his 4th season. Because they didn't sign him to an extension in his 4th season, he played through just a ridiculous amount of injuries. He had 2 knee injuries, a torn throwing shoulder, an elbow injury, an ankle injury. He had a bruised rib that year. Like, Baker Mayfield was just absolutely gutting it out for a team that had no chance of making the playoffs, and a team that planned to move on from him at the end of the season, because any ability Baker Mayfield showed his first year or that 3rd year where they made the playoffs and won a playoff game against Pittsburgh, they grinded it out of him. Baker Mayfield, I mean, it's been known for years, he's a smaller stature quarterback and all that stuff. But the other thing was he was a 2-time former walk-on, which means that you look up and Baker Mayfield is 28 years old. And Baker Mayfield being 28 years old means that he's kind of at that age where the guys who don't really have it as a quarterback in the NFL start to see a decline. Like, we've seen for a few years that, like, Kirk Cousins was a fully formed quarterback, and then a bunch of young quarterbacks replaced him. And then Jimmy Garoppolo became a fully formed quarterback, and then a bunch of quarterbacks entered the league, and he went from like the 15th best quarterback to 25. Andy Dalton went from 15 to 25. That's kind of where Baker Mayfield's at this point, is just teams would rather choose the young guy to replace you. And whether that's Bryce Young with the Carolina Panthers or whether it's Kyle Trask with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, teams have just opted for, we're going to take the young quarterback instead of you. And yeah, Baker Mayfield is in what I call the bridge watering stage of his career, which is he is just going to be a quarterback hoping that he can get one last big contract before he is no longer able to play the quarterback position at a high level. If this is his last year in the NFL, it's going to be because he is the kind of quarterback who doesn't need to reinvent himself just to stay in the league as a backup. Like, he doesn't need to have the underdog, unbridled confidence that he's had for all these years, because he's accomplished everything he can in the sport. There's no reason to just keep going on as a backup. Maybe that's what he says.
Well, he hasn't accomplished everything he can in the sport. I mean, obviously there's MVP, individual honors, there's team honors. He hasn't accomplished that.
Yeah. No, but he's never going to be able to do that, right? Like, yes, Phillip Rivers never won a championship. And by the time he was 37, there was no chance he was going to win a championship. Like, yeah, Baker Mayfield, that would be like setting the bar, I think, too high for Baker Mayfield, because again, this is a former 2-time walk-on quarterback who became the greatest quarterback in the history of college football for a season.
I think that's
an
part
incredible
of
story.
But I think that's part of the problem, right? Like, Baker Mayfield, his expectation, his ego, what he sees in himself is not a Bridgewater quarterback. I mean, the biggest difference between him and a Teddy Bridgewater is Teddy Bridgewater never really had commercials. Teddy Bridgewater never was like the face of a franchise. Like, I guess Minnesota as the starting quarterback, but if you told me about Teddy Bridgewater being their starting quarterback back in the day, like, okay, like Baker Mayfield, if the Cleveland Browns would have went on to have a little bit more success, he would have been like almost as big as LeBron in Cleveland. Hell, he at one point, like, winning their first playoff game in like 30 years. That still, like,
he was the quarterback that broke the drought, right? They had like 17 quarterbacks in 15 years, and he was the first one that actually looked like he was worth a damn for that franchise. They grinded him up and tossed him out the door. If you remember last offseason, he was kind of like in limbo for like 5 months or something, where they had already moved on from him, but they weren't ready to just cut him outright. They were waiting for a team that was willing to pay at least a little bit of his $18 million fifth-year option. And then Carolina was the team that stepped up. And Cleveland paid $12 million and Carolina paid $6 million. And then Baker ended up getting tossed out. But I think the last 2 years have been a reality check.
Yeah. So you mentioned other quarterbacks. So like dropping from 15 to like 25. Where is Baker Mayfield realistically? You said not a starting quarterback. So is he outside the top 32 in terms of ability? Like, are there 32 guys that you look at and think better than Baker Mayfield?
He's number 32. I feel like I can say with relative certainty he is the worst starting quarterback going into the season in the NFL. Desmond Ridder is probably pretty close. Sam Howell's pretty close, but those guys are kind of what I think of as the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL. It's Ridder with the Falcons, it's Howell with Washington, and it's Baker Mayfield with Tampa. So I guess that means he's like in the 25 to 26 range. And granted, there's like 4 rookies who haven't played yet, so I haven't really like put them into the list yet just because they're rookies and we don't know what they are yet. But and I think Jordan Love's also in that group, so maybe Jordan Love is also considered a rookie because he hasn't really played yet as a quarterback. So yeah, I'd say Baker's probably in that like 25, 26, 27 range.
So if you're Tampa, do you have any obligation to start him over Kyle Trask? Because you've seen a lot of Baker Mayfield on tape. We've seen him play a lot of games in the NFL, so we more or less know where Baker Mayfield is. We haven't seen Kyle Trask, and I don't know if you're a big Kyle Trask believer or not, but at least we can potentially see it the same way we talk about like a Trey Lance. Like, it'd be nice to just kind of like see what he has on the field as opposed to Baker Mayfield, who we know who he is on the field. Like, if you're Tampa and you're seeing this training camp right now, are you thinking to yourself like, well, fuck, if we're going to be bad, we might as well just start the new guy?
So I'm usually always in favor of start the new guy instead of just the placement holder quarterback. I remember last year I was yelling from the very beginning of training camp until week 4, why the hell are the Steelers playing Mitchell Trubisky? You drafted a quarterback in the first round. He's clearly your long-term plan. Please put Kenny Pickett in to start week 1 of the season. And by week 4, they had made the call. They'd seen enough of Trubisky being bad. And then they replaced Trubisky with Kenny Pickett and haven't looked back since because they are invested in Kenny Pickett's development. The difference with this team is I don't know if Tampa Bay is invested in Kyle Trask's development. Because remember, they picked him with, I want to say, the last pick in the second round the year after they won the Super Bowl.
Different circumstances, though, when you're talking about Tom Brady being on the roster versus Baker Mayfield being on the roster.
Yeah, but I don't know if they believe Kyle Trask is their quarterback of the future. Now, maybe you say this season is a wash anyways, and you give him a chance. But maybe they go into the season believing, hey, if we have good luck with health, if Mike Evans bounces back this season, then maybe, just maybe, we can win the NFC South like we did last year. And I just don't know which quarterback gives you the better option to win, but I also know Tampa Bay isn't invested in Kyle Trask's future because they drafted him to be a backup quarterback. He was a later round pick that didn't really have franchise quarterback potential when they picked him. Meanwhile, the Pittsburgh Steelers, regardless of what you thought about Kenny Pickett going into that draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers made the call. Kenny Pickett is the quarterback we're investing in for the future. We're drafting him in the first round. We're giving him every opportunity to develop. I don't know if Tampa Bay's committed that way to Kyle Trask or if Trask is a placeholder for the quarterback they're about to draft in next year's NFL draft. So if Kyle Trask is viewed as a placeholder, the difference between playing Baker and Kyle Trask is kind of regardless if neither's going to be on the roster next season. But if you believe that either of them has a chance to be on the team next year, you play that one. And I don't know which quarterback they think has a better chance of being on the roster next year between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. You play whichever one you think has the best chance to stay on the team and give them the repetitions.
I'm pretty sure Kyle Trask still has at least a couple more years on that rookie deal, right?
Yeah, but we've seen backup rookie quarterbacks get tossed all the time. I think Kellen Mond just got
cut. But if they wanted to keep him as a backup even next year, like let's say they just wanted to see what he can do on the football field, they could keep him next year, right? Because Baker's just on a 1-year deal, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think Kyle Trask is 20. He was drafted the year after they won the Super Bowl. So that would be, this is his 3rd year. So he's got 1 more year after this.
Now, Tampa is potentially in a blow-up mode, but they can also, and it's oddly enough, just because of the division they're in, they could also still potentially make the playoffs if the NFC South is just as bad as it was last year, right?
Yeah, but that's where the question is interesting, is which quarterback does give you the best chance to make the playoffs? Is it Baker Mayfield or is it Kyle Trask? I have no idea. I'm going to suspect Tampa has no idea either. So, I mean, I don't think Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask are like long-term plans as an NFL starting quarterback, but I didn't think Geno Smith was last year. So potentially I could be wrong. Maybe Kyle Trask is given the opportunity and he looks like a solid quarterback.
Well, the difference is that last year, and we didn't believe it when he was saying it, but last year, Pete Carroll was saying, man, it's a nice luxury to feel like you have two starting quarterbacks when he was talking about the Drew Lock versus Geno Smith discussion. And then Geno went out there and proved what he proved, made a Pro Bowl, looked pretty solid, and we could kind of see it. But every headline I'm seeing, at least out of Tampa, is negative press. Baker Mayfield throws another one and throws another one. And I think when you consider it to the type of player that Baker Mayfield is, I want to say he's thrown the most interceptions since he's entered the league.
It's something like that. And Baker Mayfield, from what he's telling us, took less money for an opportunity to be a starter in Tampa. I don't know how true that is because I've only heard it come out of Baker Mayfield's mouth, but he is basically saying, I believe I am a starting quarterback in the NFL still, which if you're Baker Mayfield, of course you have to believe that.
Well, I wanted to believe that he was going to stay in Los Angeles. I actually thought that was probably the best situation potentially for him with Sean McVay sticking around because Sean McVay, we respect him as an offensive mind, right? I'm a little worried for Baker in this sense. And I guess this is where I should ask is if this is truly the end of the road for Baker Mayfield, did he maximize his ability or was he just screwed from the start? Because you look at the Cleveland situation, we talked about the Freddie Kitchens era, the brief Freddie Kitchens era. Stefanski comes in, loves him one season, hates him the next. Then he goes to Carolina, which we know how fucked that situation too was. And now he's in Tampa where, I mean, Tom Brady would never outwardly say it, but I think that he was so over Todd Bowles and that coaching staff after Bruce Arians was gone. And yes, that was Tom Brady's fault. Don't get me wrong for pushing Arians out. But now Baker Mayfield goes to that. And maybe Todd Bowles and that staff is just a bad staff at the end of the day.
So to answer the first part of your question, did Baker Mayfield maximize his NFL ability? If we're thinking about his career in hindsight, I would say no. Part of it on him, part of it on Cleveland. And the year that Freddie Kitchens was the coordinator was just sabotaged from the start for Baker Mayfield, and it stinted his growth. But the other side of that is Baker was pounding his fists on the table for them to make Freddie Kitchens the offensive coordinator. So both maybe are at fault there. The last season, he shouldn't have played through the injury. He should have sat around week 3, sat out the season, made Cleveland have to pick whether or not they were going to keep him long-term or not, because all playing through the season did was make it clear in Cleveland's head that he was not worth keeping around. He shouldn't have played that last season. And so from there, it's hard to evaluate what the rest of his career has been because he got to Carolina, was so bad that they just straight up cut him. Like he was the third string quarterback on the Panthers who didn't have a quarterback basically to start the season. And then had that run with the Rams where, I mean, he was playing well, or he was playing relatively well, but it was meaningless football. I mean, the Rams were out of it from the start. And
yeah. And go back, you mentioned the comeback effort, right, on Thursday Night Football. You even go back to that one. There was some interceptions that should have been had by the Raiders defense that just weren't interceptions.
Yeah, for sure. So no, Baker Mayfield didn't maximize his NFL career, but that doesn't mean like Baker Mayfield's career is a failure. Like the fact that he was the number 1 pick in the NFL draft and the fact that he stuck around as a starting quarterback for even 5 years is absolutely remarkable. Again, this dude is 5'9" without super athletic physical gifts. He was a walk-on at Texas Tech. Cliff Kingsbury didn't keep him around despite the fact he won Big 12 Newcomer of the Year, filling in for, I think it was post Patrick Mahomes at that point, and moved to Oklahoma, wins the freaking Heisman Trophy at Oklahoma, has the greatest statistical season in the history of Big 12 football, which is saying a lot because there's been some crazy statistical seasons in the Big 12, and then gets drafted number 1 overall in the NFL draft. Like, and then gets all the commercials and gets to be a legend at Oklahoma forever. Like,
but
yes,
isn't
his
that
career
kind
is
of
incredible success.
Part of the problem in terms of why people look back and think of his career as a failure because he was the number one overall pick? Like, would we look at his career differently if he was drafted 15, 10 relative to Josh Allen, Lamar, Josh Rosen, even, and Sam Darnold in that draft?
If the 2018 draft had been drafted correctly, he would have been the third quarterback in a 2-quarterback class. And by the way, most NFL, think about it. There's like, what, 16 NFL quarterbacks that are worth a damn that are going to have 10-year-long careers as a starting quarterback. That means basically like 1 to 2 quarterbacks a year that's actually worth a damn gets drafted in the NFL. Like the fact that he was kind of on the fringe of like the third quarterback in a 2-quarterback class is still an incredible success because he doesn't have the physical gifts of Sam Darnold. Now, granted, Sam Darnold's going to have a better second stage of his career, but that's not for Baker Mayfield's abilities as a quarterback. It's because Baker Mayfield was an immature asshole coming out of college and never really got rid of the full immature asshole part of the game. And, you know, there's been all sorts of immature moments that people have talked about with Baker Mayfield. I mean, what was the quote
Duke
that Stefanski
Johnson
had?
thing. Yeah, you had the Duke Johnson thing. You had him calling out the training staff, something about concussions or injuries or misevaluation, whatever.
The arrest in college where he's running away from the police. You have the grabbing the junk thing that is going to be one of his defining moments. You have
Hugh Jackson. You know, he had that situation where he's jawing at him on the sidelines.
Wasn't it Stefanski who said they wanted an adult in the room when they were getting ready to move off of him? That was the whole thing that they were saying.
Yeah, that was something that was getting discussed as well. Like, we want an adult in the room. And obviously, when you consider what ended up happening in Cleveland, too, that's also an indictment on Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, and again, he was the one who was pushing hard for Freddie Kitchens, and Jimmy Haslam believed he was the long-term option at quarterback and gave him the head coach he wanted. And it was the biggest failure.
And again,
the
commercials get used against him too. Like, again, go get your money, sure, but like when you just have one good year in the NFL and then you come out and have like more commercials than touchdown passes at one point, you know, that's a problem for an NFL team.
But again, that's the reason why we're talking about, will this be Baker Mayfield's last year in the NFL? It's the same thing we talked about a couple weeks ago with Carson Wentz. It is, you have to be really well liked to be a backup quarterback in the NFL. And this is the moment of Baker Mayfield's career where in his mind, he is always an underdog. And by the way, he's got good reasons to believe he is always an underdog. He is a 2-time walk-on quarterback who ended up having the greatest statistical season in college football history until Joe Burrow a couple years later. Like, he is perennially an underdog. He went to Cleveland, the ultimate city of underdogs who haven't had a franchise quarterback in 15 years. And he's the savior. He's the God complex. And it's what happens when using the haters as fuel of sorts. What happens when that underdog mentality and trying to prove everyone wrong? What happens when they're right and you're wrong? And that underdog mentality doesn't serve you anymore. That's kind of where we're at with Baker
You give it
Mayfield.
to Colin Cowherd, right? He was like on Baker Mayfield from the start as far as like what he thought of him. In fact, Hal, go back to that Baker Mayfield interview on the Cowherd show. That was also part of like his legacy as well. Like him showing up, Colin, after like he had a successful first year in Cleveland, and now here we are.
Like I said, this originally started with he's the third quarterback in a 2-quarterback class. Sam Darnold's going to have a promising career as a backup quarterback because Sam Darnold is more well-liked.
To play devil's advocate here, though, I would say, obviously, and I'm alluded to this, but part of it is where you end up, right? Like if Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson ended up in Cleveland, how different would their careers be? Like, especially like a guy like Josh Allen, right? Who was considered a project, didn't look that great his first couple of years in Buffalo, but Buffalo had the right staff to work with him, develop him, and make him a better quarterback. Whereas Baker Mayfield's ability regressed under the coaching staff in Cleveland because his rookie year, I mean, comes out, sets the, at the time, NFL rookie record for passing touchdowns. And the second year, I mean, again, Baker, it was Freddie Kitchens, but still, like you mentioned, Baker wanted Freddie Kitchens, and his ability regressed because of it.
Baker Mayfield had 2 seasons as an NFL quarterback where he was legitimately, if he could have had his first season and his third season every year of his career, he would have been Kirk Cousins. If he could have done his first year and his third year every year, he would have been a couple-time Pro Bowl quarterback, a starter in the league for 12 years. It was the second year with Freddie Kitchens, and then his body just fell apart because he played through 7 different injuries in that 2021
But
season.
why he could never be Kirk Cousins, honestly, though, is going back to it, the interceptions, the turnovers. That's part of Baker Mayfield's game, too, which is unfortunate because when you consider what made him so great in college, it was that he was a precision quarterback, most accurate quarterback in the game, and he just went away from that. He wanted to be the playmaker. He always thought that he was more athletic than the other guys on the field, when clearly when you get into the NFL, that just doesn't translate as well. You're just not the athlete you once were, especially at the quarterback position.
Absolutely. I didn't mean Kirk Cousins in terms of like his play ability, although he could have evolved into being one of the short accuracy guys in the league. I just meant like he was an above average quarterback. Yeah. His first year, he had 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and a 94 passer rating. League average is about 91.6.
I think a good comp, though,
pretty good, is
he wanted to play like Mahomes. He wanted to play like Josh Allen. He wanted to play like Brett Favre. He wanted to be the gunslinger. And at a certain point, it's like you got to stop being the gunslinger. You kind of honestly would have been better if he played more like Tom Brady, quick, out of the hand, accurate, Drew Brees, or any of the other ones that like we kind of think of that pick apart, slice and dice in the short passing game. That would have probably been playing more to his strengths.
Maybe that's where having 4 different offensive coordinators in 3 years in Cleveland probably didn't help, right? Having 4 different offensive coordinators probably didn't help him out to where it was kind of the Baker Mayfield offense. But again, this is where I think his career is so interesting for so many different reasons. But I think that this is where it kind of, because it's over at this point. Let's put it there. Whether he gets the starting job in Tampa, whether he doesn't get the starting job in Tampa, it's over. People are picking Tampa to finish 4th in the NFC South this year.
So even if he gets the starting job right, he's probably going to lose that job at some point during the season. If you had to put your money on it, if he starts week 1, how long before he gets replaced in season?
Yeah. I mean, it happened last year, right? He was the starter out the gate for the Panthers, and he got like 3 games. Then he had to go in and he had to replace P.J. Walker, played like shit, and then they cut him. So like, yeah, it's basically over for Baker Mayfield at this point. It's just, if he sticks around as a backup quarterback, I don't think of that as being like the legacy of Baker Mayfield. It's like he's sticking around because it's nice to be an NFL quarterback. It's fun to play football. Hell, I haven't thought about Andy Dalton's career in like 4 years. It's basically been signed, sealed, and delivered at this point for Andy Dalton being an impact quarterback. That's where Baker Mayfield's at this point. So he's in that group of like the 3rd tier quarterbacks in terms of careers. He didn't have a 15-year career. He didn't have a 10-year career as a starter. He had about a 5-year career, a few years where a team was going to take a chance on him instead of a rookie. And then after this year, he'll be a backup quarterback again. I mean, he was a backup quarterback last year. It's just he chose to go to the one place that had a quarterback opening, and he still might not even get the job because they'll opt for the rookie, the young guy who's been a backup quarterback for the last 2 years. And I mean, either way, I mean, at the end of the day, Baker Mayfield's career is going to feel like a disappointment because he only got 5 years as an NFL starter. But the fact that he was even as good as he was, given the skills that he had and given the physical abilities that he had, like, his career is incredible. Like, his journey to get to this point is absolutely incredible. And at this point, his body's been physically broken. The underdog mentality thing doesn't work anymore because you are no longer an NFL quarterback. It doesn't serve him anymore. And I'm interested to see how he changes for the next stage of his career.
All right, guys. Well, that's a little bit of a retrospective currently on Baker Mayfield's career. Or is it a retrospective? Can he take back the reins in Tampa and win over that job over Kyle Trask? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.